Chapter 2, Reliving the Past. First, let me put these daffodils where they belong, my dear. Then I'll take you inside, exclaimed Mr. Kit. We walked to the opposite side of Vernon Hall, and I couldn't take my eyes off the dark stone walls of the castle and the large gaping windows. The déjà vu I had felt initially kept reoccurring. I thought I now saw flashes of something, a bygone era perhaps. Nothing was clear, but I felt that I somehow knew this place. I saw a raven sitting on one of the dilapidated turrets. It croaked as it saw me and flew off. The skies were a dull grey, and I could hear the waves crashing behind me. How could I forget this cryptic castle overlooked the silver sea? As we reached the facade, we entered a withered garden. It was flanked by colonnades that showcased antique marble statues and urns. The garden walls were clustered with overgrown climbing plants. The oak trees were dying, and the green grass had now yellowed. There was a malodorous, algae-drenched lily pond featuring a crumbling cherub statue covered with moss in the center. Within this garden was the entrance to another decaying garden obstructed by overgrown yew hedges. It was apparent that these gardens were not maintained. What did Mr. Kidd do here, I wondered, but I didn't ask, seeing how elderly he was. Clearly he no longer possessed the faculties to properly care for Vernon Hall. What's surprising is that as we passed the pond, something caught my eye. There in the decaying gardens of Vernon Hall was a grave. It was unmarked with no tombstone, but a wooden cross was erected before it. Mr. Kit bent over with great difficulty holding his back and laid the fresh daffodils on the grave. I realized he needed help to stand again, and so I assisted him. "You're a kind lady, aren't you?" He smiled with gratitude. He appeared to be a very sweet man, I thought to myself. "Mr. Kidd, whose grave is this?" I inquired. At first he didn't answer, as appeared to be customary with the old man. He seemed lost in a trance for a few moments before speaking. "I don't really know, my dear. It was here when I started looking after the estate. But what I do gather is that whoever is buried here must have lived at Vernon Hall at some point in time." The friendly old man beckoned me to follow him to the castle. The main door was wooden and coated in a sheet of dust and cobwebs. Mr. Kit unlocked a worn-out, rusty padlock and jostled the door open. The hinges squealed as he pushed with all his decrepit might. By now, eventide had swept across Vernon Hall, and the overgrown vines which had shrouded the windows barricaded the fading sunset. The interior was thus pitch dark. It was frosty, surprisingly so, considering it was spring, and the outside temperature was moderate, even warm in the afternoons. My breath produced patches of fog, and my hands suddenly felt numb from the cold. I hissed and clenched my fists. Seeing my state of anxiety, Mr. Kit took my hands in his and rubbed them gently until the numbness had gone and I could once again feel the blood flowing through them. "Are you all right, my dear?" He spoke very softly. "I'm all right, Mr. Kit. It's just that it is so uncannily dark and cold in this house. I don't believe in such things, otherwise I would have thought there was some sort of a presence here." Mr. Kit ignored my words and rummaged in his pockets for a match. He then lit a large candelabra shrouded with dust and beckoned me to follow. The main hall had a stone floor, high dark walls, a crumbling fireplace, torn draperies, and a rather archaic and moth-eaten sofa set. I suppose you wouldn't know what happened here, Mr. Kit? I asked. Why is this house so bleak? Mr. Kit turned suddenly. The flames of the candelabra in his hand cast a ghost like reflection, and for a moment I only saw his eyes glowing. And then he said, "Death comes to all, my dear. Everything beautiful blossoms, then dies. The key is to live, love, and forgive whilst we can. This house has been steeped in superstition. It entails centuries of pain, grief, and death. 'Tis a spider's web. It ensnares people and drains them of compassion and love." Upon finishing his eerie speech, he grew silent. I then spoke. My mother left me her journal. I haven't read it yet, but frankly, I had planned to read it once I was inside Vernon Hall. Perhaps her journal might explain what exactly happened here. There was pin-drop silence except for the chirping of crickets. I suddenly heard a scratching sound nearby and gasped. What is that?" Mr. Kit lowered the flames to reveal the grey stone floor and an ugly cockroach creeping across it. I screamed as I was repulsed by insects. Seeing me in distress, Mr. Kit lifted his heavy boot and squashed the ugly creature with one blow. "Sit down, my dear. Make yourself comfortable. You have nothing to fear. Have faith in an old man." He winked sweetly as he reassured. He dusted the old sofa, and once I slumped onto it, he covered me with a cozy blanket. He then lit the magnificent fireplace, and the brilliance of the flames enlivened the main hall. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling. After a few moments, it grew warmer, and as I snuggled down with the blanket, I felt less anxious, safer, in fact. Mr. Kit then fetched me a large jar with fresh water and some soup and bread. "I will leave you for the night, my dear. I shall be outside. If you need anything, or if you feel frightened, just shout out to old Kit, and he will come to your rescue," he joked. "You have been extremely kind to me, Mr. Kit. It's so strange, you know. I've only just met you, but it feels like I've known you for such a long time." I gazed sleepily at the kind old man who nodded his silver head and smiled. "You'd best start reading your mother's journal. This castle won't stand for long. Be quick." At this, Mr. Kit left me on my own for the night. I was afraid and lonely, I have to confess, but the warm hearth comforted me, as well as the knowledge that Mr. Kit was just a stone's throw away. As I finished my soup, my eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. I don't quite remember when, but I eventually sunk into a deep slumber. I saw a young woman in a black Victorian dress standing before me. Her hair was tied in a bun. She looked forlorn, as if she were in mourning, and stood by the window. But the window wasn't covered in vines. It was a clear blue day, and the garden looked green and beautiful from the window. I suddenly then realized that the woman was not alone, as a man emerged from behind her. It was the same man I had seen earlier upon arriving at Vernon Hall. Tall, dashing, wearing a long coat. He had long, dark, silky hair, and his skin was pale as the moon. He had sharp facial features and a goatee. I feared he was going to attack the young woman when she abruptly turned to embrace him. He held her tightly in his arms, and then, the strangest of things happened. He looked at me. I trembled. My chest tightened, and I felt my heart pound. His eyes grew crimson, but not with anger. It seemed to be with fear. He tightened his arms around the young woman until I realized that she was suffocating. I too felt suffocated and leapt up as if to rescue myself and the helpless woman. And then the dream dissolved, and I realized it was night again. The view from the windows was again obstructed by wine. The woman had gone, and so had the alluring, dangerous man. It was a terrible nightmare, without a doubt, and I quickly gulped down some water and caught my breath. I breathed a sigh of relief. It was this place, this haunted castle, which played tricks on my mind. I recall Mr. Kitt's words about the little time the castle had left before it would collapse. I no longer felt sleepy. In fact, if anything, I felt ever more eager to delve into the mystery of my mother's past and her connection to this God-forsaken place. I eventually opened that journal. Chapter 3. A Mother's Heartfelt Note. My dear Christine, I confess I possess secrets which I have kept locked away in an incorporeal dungeon all these years, and I would not have been reminded of them, nor would I have written of them, had I not been reminded of that dreadful night. For how can I forget the horror? How can I forget the sadness? I shudder at the thought of that ghastly moment when I transgressed the laws of God, and his wrath fell upon me. But would I go back in time and undo what I had done? Perhaps not. For love makes one do anything. What is the purpose of existence if we do not break away from the shackles of custom and wage war in the name of love? I am saddled with my memories. It is a burden most cumbersome. I feel my time is upon me, but before I depart this world, I wish to release my soul and my conscience. At the end, our soul would want some form of closure, and this can only be done if I tell you her story and mine. For we are intertwined in some mystical, spiritual